Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into some murky waters. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
Hmm.
Yeah, our main source this time, issue 9 of Fair Play magazine,
Okay.
which really goes deep into the whole world of
Right.
JFK assassination research.
Oh, yeah.
We've got interviews, document analysis, a whole bunch of theories, even a peek into the community of researchers itself.
It's really remarkable how this event just continues to fascinate and challenge people, even after all these years.
That's what I find so interesting. There's this whole community of people dedicated to uncovering the truth behind it all.
Right.
What can you tell us about them? Who are these researchers? And what kind of challenges do they face in their work?
Well, it's a really diverse group, actually, with backgrounds in all sorts of fields, but the one thing they all share is this incredible passion
Hmm.
for finding out what really happened. But unfortunately, their work is often, well, dismissed,
Yeah.
just labeled as conspiracy theories.
Right.
Just a bunch of cooks. The magazine highlights a couple of filmmakers, actually, Sean Mansfield and Keith Preston.
Okay.
They're working on a documentary called Search for Truth, and they talk about facing all sorts of obstacles, like funding issues and reluctance from potential interviewees
Mm-hmm.
because of the sensitive nature of the topic.
Yeah. I imagine that conspiracy theorist label is a tough one to shake.
It definitely creates a barrier. Oh, and the magazine also mentions the impact of Gerald Posner's book, Case Closed,
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
which basically, reinforced the official narrative.
Sounds like an uphill battle for these researchers. But they're not giving up, are they? This issue of Fair Play highlights the release of a bunch of new documents by the Assassination Records Review Board.
Oh, yeah.
I'm guessing those are a pretty big deal for researchers.
Huge. They're like gold mines,
Hmm.
offering all these fresh insights and challenges to the official narrative.
So what kind of revelations are we talking about here?
Well, one example that comes to mind is related to Lee Harvey Oswald's visit to the Cuban consulate in Mexico City.
Okay.
There are these cables, right, about his visit, and they're just riddled with inconsistencies.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty strange. And researcher John Newman, he suggests there might have even been a cover-up.
So hold on. Are you saying the CIA might have known more about Oswald than they let on?
That's what Newman argues, yeah.
Yeah.
He points out that the CIA knew Oswald was at the Cuban consulate before the assassination even happened,
Oh, wow.
even though they later denied it.
But if they knew, then why deny it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And it gets even crazier. They even had this, what they called a very sensitive method of surveillance to take photos of anyone going in and out of the Soviet embassy.
Like a secret camera or something?
Something like that. Makes you think of, like, James Bond.
It does.
But they still claim they didn't know much about Oswald.
It's hard to believe they wouldn't have been watching him closely.
Right.
Especially with all the Cold War tension going on.
Exactly. And then there's the documents about those surveillance tapes.
Oh, right. Of Oswald's alleged phone call.
Yeah, from the Soviet and Cuban consulates.
Wait, they actually had recordings of his phone calls.
Well, that's what the documents say.
Hmm.
But here's where things get really wild.
Okay.
Newman presents evidence suggesting that the FBI, they listened to those tapes and determined that it wasn't actually Oswald speaking.
You mean someone was impersonating him?
That's one possibility, yeah.
Wow. That raises so many questions, like who would do that and why?
Exactly. And to make it even more confusing, the FBI later claimed that they never even listened to the tapes at all.
So are we supposed to believe him or not? It's hard to know what to think.
It is. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. This whole event is just layers upon layers of complexity.
I'm starting to see why people are still so fascinated by it, even after all these years. Every time you think you're getting close to the truth, another question pops up. It really is like peeling back the layers of an onion, isn't it? And with each layer, you find something even more puzzling.
It's true.
Remember those phone calls we were talking about?
Yeah.
The ones from Oswald to the consulates?
Yeah.
This magazine mentioned something called a missing conversation.
Oh, right.
It seems like a whole conversation just vanished, connected to those calls, they say. It could change how we understand what Oswald was really doing in Mexico.
It's definitely a curious detail. Multiple sources mention it, actually.
Really? Who are these sources?
Well, there's a translator, a CIA officer, and Sylvia Duran.
Sylvia Duran, the witness connected to Oswald.
The very same.
Yeah.
And they all hint at a conversation that just doesn't appear in any of the official transcripts.
So there's this whole exchange of words, potentially really important information, and it's just gone.
Poof. Vanished.
Incredible. What could have been said in that missing conversation? And why would it be missing?
Well, the timing is really interesting. This missing conversation supposedly happened on September 28th, 1963, just a few weeks before the assassination.
So close to the event.
Right. And some people speculate that the conversation that we do have, the one from that day in the transcripts, might have been fabricated, to replace the real one.
To cover it up.
Exactly.
Wow. It makes you think, was there something in that conversation that someone didn't want the public to know?
It's a very real possibility. But without the original recordings, it's impossible to say for certain what was actually said.
We can only speculate. But fair play doesn't stop there.
Oh, no. There are plenty more twists and turns.
They tell this story about a Canadian photographer, Norman Similis, I think his name was.
Similis, yeah.
And he claims he has photos, images of two figures in that Texas school book depository window, right at the moment of the assassination.
Two figures?
You mean someone besides Oswald?
That's what he claimed. He even gave an interview to Liberty magazine. Talked about seeing Jack Ruby in Dallas before the assassination, too.
Jack Ruby, wow.
Yeah. And he expressed this belief that Oswald, if he was even involved at all, was not alone.
So he had photographic evidence of a second gunman, essentially.
That's what he claimed. But he never actually produced the photos.
Really? Why not?
He said the negative, the one with the images, was either lost or stolen. Both the FBI and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they investigated, of course.
I bet they did.
But the photos never surfaced.
So we're left wondering, was he telling the truth? Or was he just caught up in all the conspiracy theories surrounding the assassination?
It's a good question. There are inconsistencies in his story, that's for sure. But then there are other details, little things that make you wonder if he might have actually been onto something.
So it's hard to dismiss him completely.
Right. And the article in Fair Play, it presents both sides, lets the reader decide what they want to believe.
It's almost like they're laying out all the pieces of a puzzle, but not telling us how they fit together.
That's a good way to put it.
So we've got these missing conversations, suspicious cables, a possible second gunman, and now they're diving into alternative theories about the assassination.
Yeah.
What else do they explore?
Well, one that really stands out is this article about a potential Freemason conspiracy.
Freemasons? Really?
Yeah. They basically argue that Freemasonry, being such a powerful and secretive organization, they had the means, the motive, to orchestrate the assassination.
And cover it up afterwards.
Exactly.
That sounds like a pretty far-fetched theory. What kind of evidence do they present to support that?
Well, they bring up the historical case of Captain William Morgan. You familiar with that?
Rings a bell, but refresh my memory.
He was abducted and murdered back in the 19th century for trying to expose Masonic secrets.
Oh, right. I remember that.
So they're using that as a kind of precedent. The idea that this organization has a history of silencing people who threaten its interests.
So they're saying the Freemasons have a long history of cover-ups, going back centuries.
That's their argument, yeah. And they go on to suggest that modern Freemasonry and even the CIA could be viewed as tools to protect certain U.S. interests. They even connect them to the assassinations of Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X.
Wow. It's not hard to see why this theory gets a lot of pushback. It's a pretty bold claim.
It definitely requires some critical thinking, that's for sure. But even if you don't buy into the Freemason theory, it's a reminder that there are always different perspectives on these events.
Especially with something as complex as the JFK assassination.
Exactly. And Fair Play doesn't shy away from exploring those different perspectives.
And speaking of different perspectives, there was another article that really stood out to me. The one about all those mysterious deaths connected to the assassination. The one originally from Ramparts magazine. It really captures the fear surrounding this whole case.
Yeah, it's a pretty chilling aspect of this whole event. The sense that a lot of people who might have known what really happened ended up dead under some pretty suspicious circumstances.
It's like something out of a spy movie. Witnesses start disappearing one by one.
Right.
Do they mention any specific examples that stood out to you?
There were quite a few, but two that come to mind are Bill Hunter, a reporter, and Tom Howard, a defense attorney. They both witnessed a meeting between Jack Ruby and some individuals connected to the investigation.
And then?
Hunter was shot and killed by a fellow police officer under some very suspicious circumstances. And Howard, he died of a sudden heart attack just hours after another attendee of that meeting denied it ever happened.
So one is killed by a fellow cop, and the other has a convenient heart attack right after a key piece of information is denied.
It's almost too much to be a coincidence.
And the magazine says there were others.
Oh, yeah. Dorothy Kilgallen, a big-time journalist, she was investigating the assassination, died from a suspected drug overdose. And Warren Reynolds, a used car salesman, he witnessed the alleged assassin fleeing the scene of Officer J.D. Tippett's murder.
Yeah.
He later died in a car accident that many consider suspicious.
So many untimely deaths. It really does create a disturbing pattern.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible that these were deliberate attempts to silence people? People who knew too much?
It's impossible to say for sure, but the article, it argues that these deaths, intentional or not, they definitely contributed to this climate of fear, made witnesses and researchers think twice about speaking out.
Who could blame them, really? With all these loose ends and strange events, it almost makes you wonder if we'll ever truly know what happened that day in Dallas. You know, it's amazing with all this research, all these different theories and documents, you'd think there'd be some kind of consensus.
Right.
But there's still so much debate, even within the JFK research community itself.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there. This issue of fair play, it actually has a whole section called Critics and Anti-Critics.
Catchy.
It dives right into these disagreements you see. Even among people who are dedicated to uncovering the truth, you've got different schools of thought.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Different interpretations of the evidence and even clashes of personalities sometimes.
Like a whole other level of drama.
Kind of, yeah. It just shows how complex and how emotionally charged this whole topic is.
So what are some of the big sticking points? What are these researchers arguing about?
Well, the role of Lee Harvey Oswald is a major one.
Of course.
Some researchers, like Harold Weisberg, they believe he was a patsy, you know.
A patsy?
Yeah, someone who was framed for a crime they didn't commit.
So they think Oswald was innocent.
In a way, yeah. They believe he was set up to take the fall.
While others believe he acted alone.
Exactly. And then there's a whole other group who think that he might have been involved, but only as part of a bigger conspiracy.
Like a pawn in a much larger game.
Exactly. It's a question that has fueled countless debates and theories.
And it all ties back to what we were discussing earlier about someone possibly impersonating Oswald in Mexico City.
Right.
If that's true, it really throws a wrench into everything we think we know about his role.
Absolutely. And that's just one example. There are disagreements about practically every aspect of the case.
Like what?
Oh, the number of shots fired, the bullet trajectories, the authenticity of the autopsy photos and x-rays, you name it.
It's mind-boggling. After all this time, we still don't have clear answers to some of the most basic questions about the assassination.
It's true. And that's why the JFK assassination continues to fascinate and frustrate people in equal measure.
So with all this back and forth, all these conflicting opinions, how do we as people who are trying to understand this event, how do we even begin to make sense of it all?
That's where critical thinking comes in. Fair play reminds us that this isn't about blindly accepting one theory or another. It's about carefully examining the evidence, considering different viewpoints, and acknowledging that we may never have all the answers.
So it's more about the journey than the destination.
In a way, yeah. It's about the process of inquiry as much as it is about reaching a definitive conclusion.
This whole deep dive has been a whirlwind. We've gone through layers of intrigue, mystery, and unanswered questions.
We have.
It's both fascinating and unsettling to realize that even with all the research that's been done, the truth about JFK's assassination might always remain elusive.
It's a reminder that history is rarely neat and tidy. But it also underscores the importance of continuing to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, and to seek truth wherever it may lead.
So what do we do with all this? Where do we go from here?
Well, Fair Play does provide some helpful resources for those who want to delve further into the JFK assassination.
Oh, good, because I think I'm going to need to do some more digging after that.
I think we all are. Their Who's Who and What's What section is a great place to start. They list organizations like the Assassination Archives and Research Center, or AARC for short.
Okay.
And Citizens for Truth about the Kennedy assassinations, CTKA, they publish a newsletter called PROBE.
I'll have to check that out.
And then for those who really want to get into the nitty-gritty of the research, there's The Fourth Decade. It's a journal dedicated entirely to new JFK assassination research.
Wow, they really cover all the bases.
They do. So for anyone listening who wants to continue exploring this, there are plenty of paths to follow.
It's like we've opened a door to a whole new world.
In a way, yeah.
As we wrap up here, is there any final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest takeaway from all of this is the importance of not being afraid to question, to investigate, and to draw your own conclusions.
Think for yourself.
Exactly. The JFK assassination is a stark reminder that history is not always what it seems, and sometimes the most important discoveries come from those who are brave enough to dig deeper.
Well said, well said. So, to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep exploring the world of JFK assassination research.
Don't be afraid to dive in.
Examine the evidence, Consider the different perspectives and ultimately decide for yourself what you believe happened that day in Dallas.
It's a journey worth taking.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll finally have all the answers. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the JFK assassination.